Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and joining this webinar on the planned new post-Brexit points-based immigration system. My name is Agata, Patyna. I'm one of the barristers in the immigration team at Doughty Street, and I am joined by today's speakers, my colleagues Phil Haywood and Krishnendu Mukherjee. For those who are new to Zoom or new to our webinars, you will notice that your mics are muted and your videos are off, and this is just a pre-setting to avoid any interference. We really do encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your screens, and we are asking you to use that rather than the raise hand function. At the end of the seminar, our panelists will try to deal with as many questions as possible, but if we don't have time to answer your particular question, please feel free to either email the speakers or our clerks after the seminar. We are recording this session, so a copy of the slides will be available for you or any of your colleagues who couldn't join today. We will probably take about an hour. We will start with Phil, who will take about 15 minutes taking you through the general framework of the new points-based system. He will also discuss the rules for visitors and some other categories, which Krishnendu will then not cover in his session. And he will then speak about the July guidance on coming to work and coming to study, also for about 15 minutes. So we'll have plenty of time, about half an hour, to ask questions and have a discussion. Thanks very much, and I'll hand you over to Phil.
Thanks very much. Hi, good afternoon, and thanks very much for logging on to the webinar this afternoon. Now, I'm going to begin just by giving some kind of overview of some of the policy statements that have been made. I mean, one of the slightly frustrating things at the moment is that there is a fairly long policy document, but despite its relative length, it doesn't really contain very much by way of substantive detail as to what the scheme will actually mean, which, given that the transition period comes to an end in December, really perhaps isn't ideal. So I think at the moment we are not really in a position where we're going to say very much by way of clear forecast as to the full detail of the scheme. If I can, just by way of introduction and overview, start with three of what seem to be the most pertinent statements in the policy document that has been published by the government. Now, I think there are three generally significant points in terms of the structure of the points-based system in the future and the general immigration system that emerge from this. Now, the first quotation that I've lifted from, I think it's from the first or second page of this document, perhaps makes relatively uncontroversial points in the light of Brexit and the so-called desire to take back control of the borders, or at least as it relates to managed migration. It'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of asylum policy after they withdraw from the whole Dublin system and how well they manage to deal with managing uncontrolled migration. But at least in terms of managed migration, as you can see in the first of the passages on this slide, the ambitious aim, I'm assuming that people do actually still want to come to this country, is that the points-based system will cater for, as they put it, the most highly skilled workers, students, and a range of other specialist work routes. So in essence, really, it tends to mirror the categories in the existing rules. But as the second of these quotes from the document makes clear, there's also going to be a supplementary part of this system. So the first part of the system, the points-based system, will work as it does at the moment via a system of sponsorship and employers seeking to sponsor individual workers that they require for their companies, and bringing them in if the points under the particular category are scored, then there is a supplementary system which will come in next year, but and it's clearly directed towards responding perhaps to general economic needs rather than being employer-led. And this is designed to attract what they term the most highly skilled workers, because it's certainly a feature of this points-based system that there is some relaxation in terms of the threshold requirements for the general system that we can go on to look at a little bit further in a moment. So there's this second system about which not only is there not very much detail, but in fact there's no detail at all, and we won't have that until next year. And it will retain some of the systems of the features of the existing system, such as a capping on the number of certificates of sponsorship, or however they are termed under this particular route. Now, the further part of the system is basically what they intend to do in terms of introducing a system of electronic pre-approval, the ETA system, for anyone who's not a British or Irish citizen actually coming to the UK. So this perhaps in some ways is rather like the US system, where if you have this pre-approval, you can travel to the UK. I mean, I don't know what the other intentions of this will be, whether, as for example, the US system, if you have an electronic travel authorization, that generally is sufficient for you to be able to travel. So it may be that there's some relaxation of general visit requirements. I mean, it's certainly within the policy framework of this document that they say quite explicitly that they're not intending EU citizens, for example, to have to obtain visas before travelling to the UK. So that may be part of the same process, but as yet we don't really have any detail of it. So those are perhaps three of the significant policy statements underlying the new approach. Can I now turn to the next slide, please? Now, this is very much a phased implementation, so we don't really have very much by way of substantive detail. What they do say in terms of seeking to streamline the system is that there will be a streamlining and simplification of the totally incredibly and obtusely complicated provisions within the rules in line with Law Commission recommendations. There are some other things that they intend to do, perhaps in the next bullet point, that there will be an online service to demonstrate a right to work. In relation to European Union citizens, there's an intention that it should be possible to prove rights by access to an online database. All applicants will receive written confirmation of their immigration status. So I assume this is a nod to some of the legacy of Windrush, although I doubt it's going to really deal with some of the other wider issues in relation to the status of, or the uncertain status of EU citizens who are in the UK during the transition period, but perhaps find it difficult to actually prove that their rights continue by proof of employment or whatever it is that's relied on. But hopefully that'll go some way towards protecting individual rights. The other things that are made clear with the system is that fees will be payable for all applications, and there is this immigration skills surcharge and the retention of the health surcharge, which will be payable by everyone. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Now, just to begin by the general overview of some of the other concepts within the new structure, which Tubli will address in much greater detail in his section of this presentation. As with the existing points-based system, it's an expansion of what currently applies. So all employers now seeking to bring people in from outside the UK or Ireland will have to hold sponsor licenses. There's an intention to streamline, or at least make the process quicker, by making it easier to sponsor workers. So there will be a suspension, as they put it. It hasn't been abolished at the moment, but certainly a suspension on the cap on the number of certificates of sponsorship in relation to what would have been a restricted certificate of sponsorship at the moment. That will go. So the overall ability of employers to apply will be easier. Also significant is the intention to actually remove the resident labour market test, again with the intention of streamlining and making quicker the whole process. That perhaps also goes alongside, as I note in one of the other bullet points here, that there is some relaxation in the skill level required, so it moves down from the current RQF 6 of around degree level or equivalent in terms of work experience down to level 3. Now there are other provisions of the current system that are retained, such as the general prohibition of switching from some categories, such as visitor from a visit visa. But there's an intention, just to make this system more workable, to actually allow switching between individual categories within the points-based system, so that people are not placed in a position where they actually have to leave the UK for some time during a cooling off period or something like that, so as to be entitled to return under some other part of the points-based system. There's general salary threshold of 25,600, which again, while there's been a reduction in the actual formal level of skill required, that is bound to really interfere with the ability of employers to actually bring in employees. A further concept within this whole system, and I think Tuvali will do that in more detail in this section, is this concept of tradable points. So you start off with general attributes that have to be met in all cases, and then supplementary points which can make up the points that need to be scored according to the particular tradable and exchangeable categories and things that can be scored on. So there's some flexibility in the way that it operates. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Now, there are quite important statements in relation to the position of EU citizens. So the underlying landscape really is set by the settlement scheme and the withdrawal agreement in terms of protection of EU citizens. There's reference in the ability to the ability of EU citizens to make what is termed short-term visits, so there's no description of actually what those will entail on the any restrictions that will be placed. As we withdraw from the legal framework of the European Union, EU citizens again are going to have to present a national passport rather than an ID card. Perhaps welcome is the ability of EU citizens, at least in theory, to more readily prove their rights and entitlements, as it's termed in the policy document, by an online service. And there's also going to be flexibility about the way EU citizens can upload evidence and photographs relevant to any application they make by, for example, being able to upload photographs by using the smartphone application rather than having to formally enroll their biometrics. Very much less welcome is a general introduction of the deportation framework so that it will apply to EU nationals from next year onwards to any offences that are committed after the end of the transition period. Can I move on to the next slide, please? Perhaps unsurprisingly, there's no change to the position of Irish citizens. Possession of a British or Irish passport will demonstrate permission to be in the UK per se. There will be, as they term, and perhaps the use of the word is important, routine, no routine immigration controls on journeys within the common travel area. So the common travel area mechanism continues. and there will be no immigration controls at the Northern Ireland border. Precisely how that's going to pan out in practice, when there's going to be, I imagine, a much greater impetus for people to actually enter the UK via the common travel area, remains to be seen. I imagine that controls may well be ramped up. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The document doesn't really set out any fundamental change about the position of visitors. It looks like the same flexibilities in relation to work-related activities will remain, and the possibility of short-term study within the visit structure. There's this specific declaration that EU citizens and Swiss nationals will not require visas to come to the UK, so perhaps that's the most welcome part of what we know at the moment. Once the system becomes fully electronic, along with the declared intention, as I highlighted in the first slide, perhaps there will be some underlying relaxation of the general visit requirements for some categories of visitor from particular countries, but at this stage certainly difficult to know. Now finally, if I can just move on to the next slide, the other thing that the published document does tell us about is the other kinds of categories within the rules that will be retained. So as you can see, the youth mobility, the other specific categories dealing with the more niche forms of migration, such as by sports people, by creative professionals and artists, for those working or doing unpaid work within the charity sector and ministers of religion, and then those who come here by government authorised exchanges and international agreements, and including people who are private servants in diplomatic households, etc. And then the UK ancestry provisions also will still be in a form. Some other things, such as investors or sole representatives, are not mentioned in the existing framework. So that may be perhaps an oversight, or it may simply have been something that has been removed from the structure. Difficult to know at the moment. So that really is, I think, what I'm able to say at the moment by way of some of the overarching details of the new immigration system. It is really rather scant and short on detail. But now, can I ask Tublu to move on to deal with the central parts of this scheme in relation to those coming here to work and study. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Phil, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Perhaps we go to the next slide. That's brilliant. So the purpose really of having this webinar today is really to give you some idea on what to advise your clients who are thinking of coming to the United Kingdom in a professional capacity from next year. And my part of the webinar is really based upon, first of all, the policy statement. That's the UK points-based immigration system policy statement dated the 19th of February 2020, and the more recent UK points-based immigration system further details, which came out in July of this year. And really the heart of both the policy statement and the further details is an intention by the government that from the 1st of January 2021, EU and non-EU citizens should be treated equally, and that the government intends to create a high wage, high skill and high productivity economy using technology to replace some of the jobs in the lower skilled. And that is absolutely what is the core of both the policy statement and the further details. And in order to do that, what the government intends to do is to have essentially two categories of workers. So you have the highly skilled workers, the skilled workers, and no general provision for lower skilled workers, although the government says that there'll be no change, obviously, in family reunion, asylum, plus various schemes, temporary schemes, which are there to ensure that Britain has a supply of lower skilled workers. If we go to the next slide, please. So in terms of highly skilled workers, as Phil says, one of the problems with doing a webinar at this stage is the lack of sufficient detail which the government has provided. But as we are getting some inquiries from people outside the United Kingdom, we thought it'd be worth telling you what has been proposed. First of all, what is proposed is that the category of highly skilled workers under the new post-Brexit point-based immigration system will be capped. It will be monitored throughout the implementation phase to make sure that it attracts the correct criteria, the correct type of highly skilled workers. And it is meant to allow a small number, a capped number of highly skilled workers to come to the United Kingdom without a job. And what constitutes a highly skilled worker, according to the government, hasn't yet been defined, but no doubt that will be defined in due course. Although we do have some information in relation to what the government calls the global talent route, which is already in force. Next slide, please. Skilled workers. This is something which the government has been pressing in both these documents quite substantially. First of all, that there's no overall cap on the number of people who can apply the skilled worker route. They will, however, need to meet a specific criteria of requirements for which they will score points. There are, however, some mandatory criteria which they'll need to meet. Firstly, that the applicant must have a job offer from a licensed sponsor. As Phil said, that requirement remains. The job must be at a minimum skill level of RQF3. So that's a decreasing of the skill level required from RQF6, that's degree level, to a degree level which is the equivalent of A level. The applicant doesn't necessarily, although I suppose it helps, have the formal qualification, but the skill level with which they wish to apply is the important criteria. And the applicant must speak English to an acceptable standard. And in the guidance, there is some indication of how that may be judged. So if you come from an English-speaking country, or if you pass a test, or you've done a degree in English, then all those may mean that you're able to speak English to the acceptable standard. Under the points-based system, each of these mandatory criteria will attract 20 points each out of a maximum of 70 points, which are required in order to come into the country. And the other 10 points can be obtained in various other ways. If we move to the next slide, please. So under the PBS, each applicant must meet the threshold of 70 points. Meeting the mandatory criteria will earn, the applicant 50 points. The other 20 points must be met through tradable points through a combination of salary. So the higher the salary, the more points. Whether your job is in a shortage occupation, and that shortage occupation will be determined by the Migration Advisory Committee, who will produce a list of shortage occupation, a shortage occupation list, and also through having a relevant PhD. Now, as Phil said, the general salary threshold of a job is 25,600. However, there is a minimum salary threshold of 20,480, which must always be met, even for new entrants or workers in certain health and education jobs. However, for instance, someone doesn't meet the minimum salary threshold for their occupations, but at least 70% for new entrants, or 80 or 90% for everybody else, could make up the points by working in a shortage occupation or having a relevant PhD. And there are a number of case studies in the July 2020 document which give the various scenarios on which somebody who meets the mandatory requirements and earns up to 50 points can make the other 20 points through a combination of salary rate, a job in a shortage skill, or a relevant PhD. I'd ask you to go to the website and look at that to see how that might work in various scenarios. Next slide, please. There are also, so I guess in order to bolster up the National Health Service, certainly in the light of the COVID pandemic, the government has initiated a number of different categories. First of all, in terms of the National Health Service, a health and care visa for doctors, nurses, and other health professionals. You will need a job offer, but it'll be a fast track entry. You have the right to bring in families, and you'll be exempt from the immigration surcharge. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, the global talent route. And these are people who are really obviously exceptional individuals, and their exceptionality must be endorsed by a recognized UK body, such as the Royal Society for Science and Medicine. And they also mention in their guidance a startup and innovator category, a startup category and innovator category, both of which involve setting up so-called innovative businesses for the first time in the case of startup, or those with industry experience and at least 50,000 funding in the case of an innovator. So again, very much reiterating that the new points-based immigration regime is very much based upon skills and the need of the UK to create a high wage, high skill, and high productivity economy. Next slide, please. There's been obviously a lot of criticism in relation to the fact that, for instance, care workers under the point-based system will not be able to enter the United Kingdom. And there is a list which you may wish to look at as an appendix in the further details guidance of July of this year, which lists all the jobs which won't be allowed to enter under the points-based system. So as I said, there is no general provision for lower skilled workers, and this is because of the government's intention to invest in technology and automation. There is, however, they say that the continuation of asylum and other family reunion in the rules, which will continue, will somewhat mitigate that loss of lower skilled workers, or the right of lower skilled workers to come in. But their intention is obviously to attract people who already have a right to remain here into those jobs. They've also talked about various temporary schemes which might be implemented in order to temporarily overcome shortages in the labour market. So obviously a perfect example, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, was the need to have agricultural workers, and Romanian workers were flown in because of the lack of workers with immigration status in the United Kingdom. And those that seasonal pilot project will remain. And in the policy document in February of this year, the Home Office state that it will review lower skilled jobs and the need to have temporary schemes for lower skilled jobs from time to time in order to ensure that there's no lack of people to do those jobs. Overseas domestic workers will remain, and as I have to put that in because it's mentioned in the July document, the British National Overseas exemption for those in Hong Kong, which could bring up to 3 million, very highly unlikely, but up to 3 million people who would have the right under that scheme to come to the United Kingdom. Next slide, please. So just before I move on, I think it's fair to say that in terms of coming to the UK to work, the devil will be in the detail, and we're going to see what the rules provide coming up to 2021. But it's clear that, as I said, the government intention is to treat EU and non-EU citizens equally. However, as immigration practitioners, we will all have the experience of seeing how EU and non-EU citizens and entry clearance posts around the world treat people differently in relation to visitors or in relation to other forms of entry into the UK. And I think that will have to be closely monitored to ensure that there's not going to be any significant discrimination between how this is implemented in the European Union and in non-EU European countries. And we've often seen situations in where the disparities are quite significant. And finally, coming to study in the UK, again, not a huge amount of detail in the documents, but really following on from the real problems that have arisen because of the COVID-19 pandemic in relation to especially overseas students who provide a significant amount of income for British educational institutions, and a real understanding in the documents that has been these requirements have been there to incentivize overseas students from coming to study in the United Kingdom. So there we have an uncapped level, so no quota. Dependents can be brought in. A new points-based system, which will be built on the current Tier 4 route, with the requirements retained, but will be based again on 70 non-tradable points for acceptance of study, the ability to support in English language. The government policies and guidance place great emphasis on the clear pathway to stay after a graduation, and into work if they have a suitable job. So the idea that you would come to study and then stay here in order to work is very prominent in the guidance, and indeed they will launch a graduate route in 2021 to provide international students the opportunity to stay in the UK or look for work after they graduate. So, for instance, undergraduate students and master's degree students will be able to stay for 2 years under that route. PhD will be able to stay for 3 years. It's an unsponsored route. They'll be able to work or look for work at any skill level during this period. So very much trying to attract people in order to enter the job market after a period of education. Next slide, please. So those are the links. We can certainly send out the links if you need them after the webinar. I think it's definitely worth looking at the detail as we progress and to see whether the government will produce any further policies towards the end of the year. And yes, we hope to keep you informed through this new system of disseminating information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please do time to that field, and we'll do our best to answer them. I'll perhaps start with my own question for both speakers. You obviously both said the devil will be in the detail. But is your general feeling that this new system will make it easier or harder to come to the UK? And are there any particular groups, apart from the obvious group of EU nationals, for whom you think it will be easier or harder?
I do, but I don't know if you want to answer that. I mean, I'm not sure I have any particularly strong feelings at the moment, really. I mean, I think perhaps the most significant feature of this is the relaxation in the skill level. And I think that's probably going to be the most significant feature of it. So I think in general, it will probably be much easier for employers to make out a case based on a sort of A-level equivalent skill level. And it's not necessarily set that high, is it? I mean, it may simply, in some ways, I mean, this may actually be more draconian than it actually looks. I don't know. I think it'll depend how it plays out. But I mean, what it does very clearly do is exclude all of the current workers who are working in lower skilled jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I try to say in my presentation, I think what's important really is the monitoring of who is allowed to come under the points-based system, and the reasons for refusing people under the points-based system. We all have experiences where people who meet various criteria in various places are wrongly refused, and I think that there's no reason to disbelieve that this may continue in the same way. So although I don't think that the points-based system in itself, and Phil has highlighted a number of reasons why it may be better than the previous system. So the lowering of the qualification threshold, the residence threshold, and also the uncapped skilled worker part. Really, we do need to look at the decision making that comes into play to see whether, in fact, it'll be more difficult for people from certain countries to come rather than the traditional EU method.
Thank you. We have 3 other questions, so I'll start with the first one. Is there mention of specific sector-based schemes other than agricultural work, for example, care work?
Well, I think that was. I mean, if we look at the, as I said, if we look at the further details guidance of July of this year, we'll see a whole list of jobs which are excluded in the appendix. I don't want to go into them because they amount to a lot of pages, but the government hasn't announced any other scheme other than agriculture, and certainly not in relation to care work, and care work is specifically excluded under the July guidance. But as I said, they have left open the possibility of having such temporary schemes like the agricultural one, if required, and I no doubt that will be done through research by the Migration Advisory Committee, which reports on shortage occupation areas. So I think they've left open that possibility, but as yet the answer is yes to agriculture workers, but no to care workers, which obviously is shocking given how lauded they were during the pandemic crisis.
And next question is about appeals and whether there's any detail about any changes to appeal rights at this stage.
I certainly haven't seen anything. I don't know if you have seen anything in any of the documents, but I mean, I think this is more at the moment just a sort of statement of intent in relation to the overall scheme and who will qualify within it. I don't think there's anything about sort of connected issues like appeal rights.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly nothing in the 2 documents that I mentioned about appeal rights. In terms of the rules, the immigration rules themselves, obviously what is said is that the rules themselves will be simplified and streamlined according to the recommendations of the Law Commission. So that's something that we would expect to see later on this year in preparation for January of next year. But I haven't seen anything in relation to an appeal, and I don't think there's anything that's being contemplated in relation to appeal. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about having a sort of composite immigration law, which might do away with the need to have numerous immigration laws, so one composite immigration act, but I certainly haven't seen anything further about that. So as we now stand today, we have the same appeal process that's currently in force.
We have a question from Louise about the minimum salary threshold, and do you think the 25,600 is likely to be reviewed, as realistically that will probably in itself limit the amount of workers under RQF level 3 can apply for a visa?
Sorry.
That I don't really know, but I think that's absolutely right. That that threshold probably will actually deal with the general relaxation and make it more difficult to bring people at a lower skill level in. But so far as the possibility of relaxation, I'm afraid I really can't say. I suspect that it will be reviewed once the system is in place, but difficult to say, I think, at the moment. Unless other people have views on that, I don't know.
And please feel free to type in any views you have into the chat box, and I'll share them with everyone else. We have 2 questions about students. Does the ability of students to bring dependents include dependents of undergraduates? Because that, of course, would be a big change. And the second question is, will the new Tier 4 graduate leave of 2 years renew afresh after each degree? So, for example, could you start a bachelor degree, then spend 2 years on graduate leave, then start a master's and get another year of leave after that? Sorry, a master's for a year and then get leave again for 2 years after graduating from the master's degree.
So, Mike, the first answer is, I think, in terms of an undergraduate, I think is yes. In relation to the second question, I don't know. I'll have to look that up. So I'd ask someone to put that in an email.
Yes, I mean on that second point, I'm not sure it's clearly answered. I think there's perhaps some indication that it might just be a one-off period of leave that will be granted. I mean, I don't think the guidance as it's been published so far it explicitly deals with the possibility that you might do more than one degree. So it may be that the intention is just to offer one grant, I think.
We have a follow-up question about carers. So the new health and care visa includes doctors, nurses, and so on. Give me concerns about the potential shortage of carers. Do you think there's any scope for carers to be included within the health and care visa category?
Well, I suspect there'll be quite a lot of political pressure for them to be included now. I suppose the difficulty with that is that, I mean, if it's a part of the main scheme, that the salary threshold may come under pressure, but difficult to know. But I suspect there is a relatively strong political pressure to include carers.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, the intention is obviously not to have so-called lower skilled workers coming into the country, and the majority of carers earn far less than 25,600, which is a general salary threshold. So I think the answer to that question is no, and as I said, they're specifically mentioned in the appendices of the July guidance. Having said that, if there is political pressure, or indeed if the MAC says there's need, there's absolutely nothing stopping the government from bringing in a scheme which allows a relaxation of that shortage skill, and allows them access into the country. But as yet, they are definitely exempt from this points-based system.
Thank you. We have a question from Vicky about the Tier 1 investor route, and the question is, what is your view about the reason for excluding investor and solar views from the currently released documentation?
I don't know. They haven't mentioned. I mean, there's no mention of excluding that. I'd be amazed if they excluded high-level investors. I don't know, Phil, whether you saw anything about that.
No, I mean, I'm not sure actually at this stage. Like you, I think I'm rather surprised that it's not included, and I do wonder whether it's an omission, because I would have thought that they would want to retain or have a specific investor category.
I'm sure that'll be retained in some form. I'd be absolutely amazed, and maybe the threshold might be higher, but I would be amazed if it was any withdrawing of that category.
We have a question about sanctions. What sanction a business receive for employing an EU national who has not signed up to the EU settled scheme? Presumably, the question is asking about someone who then doesn't have leave under the new points-based system.
Or any other rights from the transition arrangements. I mean, they may also be in play, mightn't they? But I suspect they'll just be sanctioned in the way under the existing sponsor guidance. You have a whole sort of set of behaviours or things that are happening with individual employees if they're detected that may lead to a licence being suspended or revoked. And I suspect that's the kind of approach they will take here as well. I mean, certainly the existing sponsor guidance tends to sanction any employer who actually employs someone who doesn't have leave to remain in the UK, and that's likely to be a basis for revocation of a sponsor licence.
We have a comment from Julian about the salary threshold as well, which says that if a specific RQF3 jobs enter the shortage occupation list, that would of course allow people to be recruited into them at the lower earnings level. So the government could use new occupation shortage occupation list to allow lower skilled migration. I don't know if either of you.
I think that's right. Actually, I think that's right. I think if they earned a minimum salary threshold of 20,480, and they were deemed to be a shortage skill in relation to the MAC's recommendations, which is ongoing and kept under regular review, that potentially they could make up the loss in points due to qualifications and so on through being in a shortage skill. That's yes, that's right.
We not comment, and perhaps the question. The new system, it seems, will require a huge increase in assessments of applications to come to the country, because EU nationals won't be free to come and go for our examination. Given thoughts to how that will process is proposed.
Sorry, Agata, I couldn't really catch that. Is this?
The comment was about the potential of a likely huge increase in the Home Office having to undertake assessments of applications from those EU nationals or family members not covered in the settled status scheme. At the moment, EU nationals are free to come and go or examination of their circumstances. And whether you think that this huge increase will pose challenges, or whether you even think there will be a huge increase in those assessments.
Assessments of EU nationals coming in. Well, I mean, the whole. I mean, if the question is about after the end of this year in 2021, then the position of EU nationals will be the same as the position of non-EU nationals, and therefore, as Phil outlined, would need prior clearance to come to the country. And would be treated in the same basis as non-EU nationals in terms of the points-based system and all the other categories that Phil also talked about. I wasn't quite clear what the other question of the other assessment was.
I think it was more of a comment than a question, okay. But thank you. I think these are all the questions that we currently have, and thank you to whoever on the chat responded to Vicky's question about sole rep rules, stating that these rules have been introduced. Feel free to read the comment in the box. Are there any closing remarks from the panelists or any more questions that we can answer? I don't think so. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
I haven't got any comments to make. I mean, I hope this has been of some use. I mean, I think the frustration for us, certainly at the moment, is, as Tubli said earlier on, is that we can sort of provide some general steer to what is intended, but we've got so little knowledge of the real detail of all of this that it's very difficult to forecast how this will really pan out, which is perhaps rather unfortunate, given that we are around 5 months away from all of this kicking in?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that I'm certainly advising people from outside the European Union is to get their ducks in line if they wish to come to the UK under the points-based system in 2021, and that means obviously ensuring that you have a job offer, that you have the requisite paperwork of the qualifications in place. Quite often you have people who don't have the proper evidence of qualification, and that's always a question that can always be also be a question mark. So whilst the detail is yet to be published, I think we have a good indication of what the government will be looking at, and what the Home Office will be looking at in 2021 onwards, and that's obviously what we should be going towards in advising our clients going forward. And this is a new regime. Okay.
Thank you very much both. As I said, a recording of this seminar will be available online shortly. It does take us a few days to get it ready, but you should all be sent a link, which of course you should feel free to share with any of your colleagues. New and perhaps exciting or scary times, we'll see. Thank you so much to Blue and Phil, and thank you to all of you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.